Son, if you're listening, I'm dead. But I left you this podcast. You'll be all right. Just pretend that I went out for smokes. Hello, everybody. I'd like to take you back to 1960s France. I like to have sex with teenagers. I like to have. I want to take my 14-year-old mistress out for a croissant.
And that's just Looney Tunes, by the way.
Yeah.
That wasn't even us saying
Oh,
that.
yeah. No, actually, when Looney Tunes would portray French people, they would actually tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Anyway.
The mistress would not also be the cousin.
Why is the French? Because they kind of asked for it, right? They were like, are they the language of love, or is that someone else?
That is, yeah.
It's French, right? Which isn't true. When you hear it, it's not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get a hard on when you no one hears. You know, it's. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I haven't.
Is there
heard
a language
the
that you hear?
I'll say this: the women
on?
kind of sound like the men, and I'm not saying that's sexy or not sexy, or is sexy.
You know, in French, they have 17 different ways of saying, the work needs me to stay late at the office tonight.
Yeah, it's just so normalized when they cheat on their wife. I remember one time me and my cousin were at, remember before GameStop, there was electronics boutique. We were at the mall, and there was this family. I don't know what language they were speaking, but they were probably like Swedish or something. It was the mom and her son and daughter.
Did it sound like they were bouncing? Did it sound like they were made out of Slinkies? I think that's how they talk, right?
Is it?
The Swedish?
I just remember them going back and forth, all the three of them, and they were just like...
yeah, exactly.
And it was
sounds like there's springs in them, right?
It was so annoying.
I only know things from the Muppets. It's whatever Jim Henson has given us.
Right. But it was just so annoying the way they were talking, because they were just speaking their shitty language like really loud. I was in there with my cousin
as a child, just mad.
Me and my cousin were just mad. My cousin was like, I want to go over there and be like, what the fuck are you saying?
Kids are so dumb.
Yeah. No, but they were kind of annoying. Like, I don't know. That was just my memory. Yeah. They were like, I don't know what it was, but Danish or whatever shit. And they were just like, Mom,
They sound like they're dipping their heads in fish tanks.
Yeah. Well, that's Icelandic is like that sounds like. It's like a lot of.
Oh, no shit.
Right, Sean?
Yeah, that's the sound you make when you're eating rotting shark.
Well, anyway, the French, yeah. They act like they made up romance or something. The language of love. That's what they say. That's why they asked for it.
Right.
They also act like they made up democracy. They invented what we know as democracy. Is that true?
Well, there's the French Revolution.
The French Revolution, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they made up freedom, they say, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
When was that they invented
freedom
free
to
will?
work 5 hours a day?
Yeah. Like they invented modern freedom, what we know of as freedom. Am I making this up?
No.
Okay. I thought I knew half of that.
Yeah. I forgot we were recording today. I didn't get a chance to look at any notes or anything.
No, that's fine. I got you.
But
I looked at
so
the notes.
You did?
Yeah.
All right.
No, it's okay.
All right. So
I'm just glad you're
like I
here,
said,
man.
Thanks. You too.
Yeah.
Like I said, 1960s France.
Is that an instrument? Is that a person?
It's supposed to be
It's
supposed to be an accordion. I forgot the
being pushed in its shit for shitting on the carpet.
I forgot the auxiliary cable.
Oh, you did? You forgot the cable that
ding 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 ding.
Makes noise.
That's somebody's bike.
Oh,
Imagine a man riding his bike through with a bag full of baguettes, and it's the 1960s.
Yeah. No.
And everybody's got a full bush. Everybody's got a big mound.
Is that true, Sean? Can you confirm this?
Everybody's got a big mound of pubes, French style. And Charles de Gaulle is the president of the country.
Yeah.
And take it away.
Yeah, so I wanted to do this episode about Charles de Gaulle just because I had this tweet, which I'll quote for you, which is, Charles de Gaulle survived multiple CIA-backed assassination attempts and a CIA-backed coup. He then set up death squads and launched a purge of CIA Gladio elements within his country and security forces. He was the real-life version of Trump in the QAnon narrative. And I tweeted that, and it's like basically true. And there were people in the replies that were like, we should do an episode about that. So I thought that'd be an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Because that mainly comes from the book The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, which is a great book. I very much recommend anybody who hasn't should read it.
You should read that.
But
I'm reading The Devil's Checkers Board.
The Devil's Candyland.
The Devil's Jumanji.
A Child's Guide to the CIA.
C.
C is for CIA. It's just Cookie Monster makes an appearance.
yeah, The Devil's Connect 4. But there's a chapter in that deals with what we're going to talk about today. And if you don't even want to read the full book, the website whowhatwhy.org has an excerpt, or it has this excerpt about Charles de Gaulle and the CIA coup. And so I'll quote from that a bit today, but I'll also link it in the description if you want to read it.
Nice.
But
so let me ask you about Operation Gladio a little bit, because I was driving through Louisiana. I was driving to the airport, and I was sitting in traffic, and I was like, let me watch a YouTube video about that. So should we start with the end of World War II?
Yeah, I mean, I will. Charles de Gaulle is such a fascinating guy. You could spend a long time just talking about World War II and all that, so I'll kind of skip over most of that. But I will just say, de Gaulle is born 1890, he dies 1970, and he was the leader of the Free French during World War II. Then he kind of heads an interim government at the end of the war. And then 1946, he resigns, he leaves politics, but he comes back in 1958 to resolve the French crisis over Algeria. Algeria was their colony, and they, pulled out of it, and it was kind of their Vietnam. They also had Vietnam. Yeah, but their second Vietnam was in Algeria. But so kind of Charles de Gaulle survived over 30 different assassination attempts from 1944 to 68 or 69. And
how many?
30.
Wow.
So a lot of that was over Algeria, and that's kind of what a lot of the episode, and if we continue it on the Patreon, that one will be about Algeria. So I'll give kind of a basic history of all that. And it's interesting, though, because it's like this is a guy who survived 30 different assassination attempts, but he is the French hero of World War II. Like in France, they still call him the general. And it's like, it's like George Washington or whoever. Just the fact that he was, so many people tried to kill him despite him being like such a important figure in French history kind of shows you, in my opinion, how powerful it is when somebody tries to end a war. Because like Algeria, Charles de Gaulle was a conservative guy. You could say he's an imperialist. He's certainly by modern standards a racist. He wasn't a peacenik. He wasn't a hippie, but he tried to end this war in Algeria, and eventually he did. And they tried to kill him like 30 times over this. So it just shows you how difficult it is to actually end a war because, people are making money.
Yeah.
And, soldiers who've lost their friends are pretty mad about it. There's lots of different factors. Or, corporations want the resources. They don't want the war to stop. And you just say, hey, you get your own country now.
Yeah, Biden got a lot of shit for pulling out of Afghanistan, right?
Yeah. And
they were like, he left all the tanks over there.
Right.
Like you're supposed to go, hey, can we just get our tanks back?
You should do something with them, right?
Well, the Taliban's doing something with them.
Well, I know. Isn't that the problem?
Yeah.
Shouldn't you do something to the tanks? I don't know. You as a guy, you go, let's act like it was really quick. Like, grab your shit and let's go. Like, there was a fire. And you go, like, you do something at least, right? You piss in them. You're pissing the tanks. So they got to do something. You don't just leave them, right?
I guess they're doing something with them, yeah.
No. The Taliban is. They took them, right? They have our shit
saying
now.
we should have done something.
I'm saying
with
we
the
should
tanks.
have. Yeah.
Yeah. Like what?
I mean, literally anything. Fucking blow them up is better than what we did.
We sabotaged a fair number of tanks.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, we did? Okay, that's good.
well, there's a lot of there were a lot of tanks over there. I mean, that was the whole thing. Is the media
The other ones we just like pranked them. We like saran wrapped them, smeared shit on the door handles. It's like, yeah, okay, we did leave a bunch, but when they go to start that engine,
Biden's like, all the door handles got shit on them, Jack.
Yeah. Biden flew in a bunch of Section 8 tenants to just sit in the tanks and fuck them up before they left.
Yeah, that's his housing program. You get to go to Afghanistan and live in a tank.
It's like a tiny house, tiny tank.
Yeah.
You just got to make sure they can't get their security deposit back. And the Taliban can't use it.
It's just a bunch of white trash families. And they all like, that could be a sitcom. Getting along with I don't know.
No, yeah, I like that.
Taliban and me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Okay.
but anyways, the point was with Afghanistan, they were very mad at Biden because they were spending $300 million a day in Afghanistan, and then you pull out, that money's gone, and like probably the majority. I mean, yes, the majority of that money just ended up back in the U.S. It goes to the defense contractors and all that. So $300 million US a day in Afghanistan, and that goes away. And then they were very mad. And then we have the Ukraine war now, so it kind of replaces it. And now everybody, or the media and the defense contractors, like Biden again.
$300 million a day to do what? To just kind of hang out there?
Yeah, just like blow up some pregnant women and give Viagra to some child rapist heroin traffickers.
Right.
Wait, they were giving Viagra to people?
That was the CIA was giving.
That was the worst thing they did. Wait, you mean they were able to get boners?
Was it specifically Viagra, or was it perhaps some Blue Chew?
Cialis.
It was Cialis?
That'd be good. You could be like the fucking Harry Truman of government overspending and going with real Viagra instead of getting the generics, wasting taxpayer money.
And listen, if it's good enough for Louis J. Gomez, man, it's good enough for me.
The CIA gave these guys Viagra. What is it's like they're lambda. This is like what kind of? It's like when they prank the chicks or whatever.
Yeah. No, they're our allies.
Yeah,
they're giving because we allied with some warlords.
Yeah, we allied with a bunch of warlords, and some of them kept Bakabazi boys, dancing boys of Afghanistan, which are like little boys that they raped.
And they asked for Viagra?
Yeah, because some of the warlords were like old and they couldn't get it up to rape their child slaves anymore.
Right.
And there was like a CIA program to give them Viagra.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sometimes almost comical how evil they are, right? It's just like, you'd think they would draw the line at no Viagra for the warlords to rape boys.
Yeah, at the very least, it's like, we'll give you the boys. You figure out your cocks by yourself,
Right.
And
Exactly.
then they're like, hey, like imagine being, first off, imagine being a man.
Yeah, when you said it's not my problem.
Who's like, yeah, exactly. Like, the what is that? The week you ever ask for like $20 from someone? You ever ask to borrow some money, right? Okay, so imagine you're like, hey, can I get a little boy? You already feel like an absolute asshole, right? He goes, hey, here's a little boy, okay?
Right.
And then you have to go oh wait. My penis doesn't work for him.
Yeah.
And you go, what?
Yeah.
You made me get you a car. You don't even got your fucking. You don't even know how to drive. You even got your license.
It's like lending somebody money for gas, and then you find out, they can't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a guy goes, hey, I'll come to your place and buy the car off of you, and then he goes, hey, I'm gonna need some gas money.
Right.
What?
Right.
Or something like that. I don't
know. It is smart. The CIA was like, no, on the news, we definitely have to lead with the Afghan women can go to school now. That's first, and then we'll put we're giving the pedophiles Viagra.
No,
that'll
be like third.
You know what it is? It's like your friend asks you for money, and then you find out he bought child pornography with it, and then he asked you for more money so you could buy a DVD player to watch it on. Like he didn't even have a DVD player to watch his child pornography. Anyway.
Yeah, but just with de Gaulle, like I said, 30 assassination attempts against this World War II hero, and not all of them the CIA was involved in, but they were definitely involved in some. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting.
By the way, we do get feedback on these types of episodes that we should let you talk.
No, it's fine.
But we got it, just putting that out there.
It's fine.
People go, stop talking over.
Like talking.
People go,
5
stop
minutes
talking
about
over Sean, and let him. People always say, let Sean cook.
this piece of shit.
Well, anyways, look. So why would you want to assassinate Charles de Gaulle? Well, he struck a really independent course for France. Like France, they detonated their first atomic bomb in the Sahara Desert in 1960, and they set up their own nuclear weapons program. It wasn't like under NATO, after World War II, the U.S. kind of came into all these European countries and would just put their military bases in Germany and just they would put their nuclear missiles in Germany, So it was like the U.S. would control those weapons, but France was like, no, fuck that. We're going to control everything that happens on our soil. And Charles de Gaulle actually kicked NATO out in 1966. He left NATO. France later rejoined. In 1966, he left NATO. He expelled the alliance's headquarters from Paris. He
actually kicked NATO out like it was a 14-year-old girl from his apartment, and his wife was coming home for a French analogy.
Yeah, he made NATO leave out the bathroom window.
Bathroom window, just holding its clothes. Yeah,
sliding down the fire escape.
Yeah.
He was against the American war in Vietnam. He was like a big critic of that. And then, of course, with the Algeria, the peace there, the U.S. really wanted to get its hands on Algeria's natural resources. It's now, I believe, the largest natural gas producer in Africa. It's one of the largest oil producers. But, so there were a variety of reasons. And then also there was this sense that, they're going to fall to the communists and all that. But just like for an example, in 1975, during the Church Committee, the investigations of the CIA by the U.S. Senate, the CIA admitted that some former French OAS soldiers, which is the OAS we'll talk about, they were a secret organization of like French soldiers who tried to kill de Gaulle. They were responsible for most of the assassination attempts against him. But they approached, or some of their members approached the CIA. The CIA admits this in 1966, 65, and they had this plot that they were asking the CIA to help them with, which was they were going to poison de Gaulle with a poison ring, which was they would get him like, shaking hands, maybe of the soldiers or like in public or whatever, and one of them would be wearing the poison ring. Mm-hmm. So when de Gaulle shakes his hand, it would poison de Gaulle and he would die. Mm. And the CIA admits that it had these meetings with the soldiers about this, but there's nothing.
Bought a cock ring by accident.
Yeah, it's like we can
fit on the guy's finger. It was too big.
We can poison him, but you're not going to like how.
And now all you have to do, Francois, is touch dicks with Charles de Gaulle.
But so the CIA admits that this meeting happened, but there's no information as to like what they said. So we don't know if they actually went along with it. Mm-hmm. We don't even know if they told President LBJ at the time. We have no idea anything beyond the fact that this meeting occurred. The CIA admits, and then they just don't say anything else about it.
Mm-hmm. He was cool with Kennedy, right?
De Gaulle, sort of. It's interesting where, we'll get to that story, but they were kind of pursuing different policies in Africa. Like there's a book about JFK called Betting on the Africans, which kind of focuses on JFK's Africa policy, and he sort of supported nationalist movements in the third world as long as they weren't communist, whereas de Gaulle was like very much still a colonist. He kind of wanted to, even though he let Algeria go, he did still want to keep France's empire together. So they had conflict there, but after he died, de Gaulle praised Kennedy a lot, and also covered in the book Devil's Chessboard. De Gaulle very much believed and knew that it was an assassination by right-wing elements in the United States that took out Kennedy.
Have you seen the Battle of Algiers, the movie?
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, it's good. It's I recommend it. It's about the Algerian War for independence.
Who's in it? What year?
It's like the 60s. Mm-hmm. Did it come out in the 60s?
Yeah, it came out in 66.
So around the time it was happening, right?
And it's interesting. Yeah, it came out like right after It was very contemporary. And it's interesting, like, maybe I'll get to this on the Patreon, but when I talk about the OAS, this organization of French soldiers or former French soldiers or whoever that tried to kill de Gaulle, and they went on this terror campaign to try to prevent Algerian independence, which we'll get to. But it's interesting, the OAS veterans, after de Gaulle eventually does beat them, a lot of OAS veterans end up in different spots, like the dictatorship in Argentina is an example. Some of them end up over there, and apparently they showed that movie, The Battle of Algiers, to the Argentinian dictatorship as like, hey, here's an instructional movie on how we can repress insurgencies. Here's how we can use torture. Here's how we can use like death flights, where like Pinochet did it, where you just take off in a helicopter or plane, you just throw somebody out the window and they're never seen again. Well, they die, but you throw them into the ocean or whatever.
Well, they're seen on some poor guy's roof, and then he's got to go up there with a
Then you show them Wile E. Coyote clips.
Yeah, they're seen on the bass fishing competition.
Yeah,
5 years later.
Well, a hole shaped like him is in the ground.
Or like, there's also talk, with the JFK assassination about the French gunmen on the grassy knoll or whatever. So, and there are like there's at least one OAS guy who I'll mention later who's a suspect in terms of like who actually pulled the trigger and shot Kennedy. And there's evidence that does place him in Dallas around the time. But so there were reasons to kill de Gaulle, and we'll kind of get through to that, and we'll go through the evidence. We'll read a bit, or I'll read a bit from Devil's Chessboard. But to just kind of really quickly do the World War II thing, de Gaulle joins the military. He's an officer in World War I. He is a general in World War II when France is invaded by Germany. Not a great one. He couldn't stop all that. I'm just kidding.
Well, he fled, right?
Eventually he had to, yeah. Like if my memory, he led like a counterattack. Like it wasn't his fault that the Nazis blitzkrieged them. But
yeah, I heard pretty much all the guys were like, guys, I don't know what you call them. The guys that are also madder, like he did at the time. And they were like, we have to surrender to the Nazis.
Officials?
Yeah,
I guess that's
whatever,
the word,
And then he was like, well, if we do, we'll be fucking killed, so I'm out. So he fled, and then they surrendered, and then they all got killed. So what he did was, smart.
So he was actually like the smartest.
Yeah, he was like, he wasn't fleeing like the way,
yeah,
Archie Bunker makes like hippies out.
Right.
You went to Canada or some shit. It's like,
de Gaulle was able to flee because the Germans invaded on his 4-hour lunch break.
When the Nazis invaded, he was the only general that didn't piss his pants immediately. So they were like, we put you in charge.
He was also 6'5", right? I feel like that's important.
Yeah, he's a tall guy,
giant man. You go. He was. They tried to assassinate him 30 times.
Yeah.
You know what? I met
20 of those times they thought he was a monster.
Yeah. It's a shame. It seems like people who are that height usually end up doing well in life. I met that guy Ben Marshall from Please Don't Destroy last night, the redhead guy.
Okay.
He's like 6'5".
Jeez Louise. Yeah, you don't see many short homeless guys.
No. You don't see many short homeless guys?
I mean, tall
homeless guys, yeah.
Tall homeless guys, yeah.
Yeah, they're all around my height.
Yeah.
Our height.
Yeah.
But so he flees.
We belong.
De Gaulle flees to.
Hey, I'm just like you.
To England, and it's interesting where, so de Gaulle's there in London after France falls and surrenders, and Marshal Pétain gets set up in France as the Vichy government. Where he runs the government from Vichy in the south of France, and the Germans kind of take over the north of France. But de Gaulle is there in London, and he barely has any supporters. And it's interesting where Winston Churchill and the British government, they're not sure who to recognize as the French government in exile. And they try to get in contact with the French generals in North Africa, because as I'll mention in a second here, France conquered Algeria in 1830. So they have like this colony for like 100 years. They have, their possessions in Africa. They have military elements down there. And Churchill and the British are, at first, they think, oh, we should go get one of those guys. Maybe they'll do a rebellion against the Germans from Africa. But they just can't get in contact with any of those generals. So by default, they say, okay, we'll go with de Gaulle. And de Gaulle is actually able to build his support and popularity just by giving these speeches over the radio from London that, of course, the British broadcast to the French, and the French people get inspired. It inspires the resistance and all that. So he kind of built his popularity that way, though it is interesting where Roosevelt and the President Franklin Roosevelt, he never liked de Gaulle, and he had his own kind of designated successor, who was a guy named General Henry Girard. That's who Roosevelt and the Americans wanted to take over France after the war because they thought he would be more compliant and all that. And there is actually this rather bizarre assassination attempt against de Gaulle on April 21st, 1943. He's in a plane, a Wellington bomber that takes off over Scotland. And basically, as soon as it takes off, it almost crashes.
This fucking guy's life, man.
Yeah.
It almost crashes, and his life is only saved because the pilot immediately recognizes what's wrong and brings it down. And then they inspect it, and apparently the airplane's separator rod had been sabotaged using acid. And the thing is, like, at the time, the press blamed, German saboteurs, but privately, de Gaulle believed that the Western Allies, maybe the Americans, maybe President Roosevelt was trying to have him killed. So, it's just one of those weird stories.
And Roosevelt just didn't want him in there because he was less compliant.
There's partly that. Roosevelt also kind of didn't have any love for the European colonialists. Like, they really exaggerate the Roosevelt-Churchill relationship. Like, they sort of got along, but Roosevelt really thought Churchill was kind of a dinosaur and was obsessed with his colonies. He thought the French were all obsessed with their colonies. He sort of, Roosevelt did believe after the war the Europeans would have to give up their colonies.
Sean, do you know what kind of dinosaur? Mike, do you know what kind of dinosaur?
What? What do you mean?
You thought Roosevelt was? You thought Roosevelt
thought Churchill was a dinosaur?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of dinosaur?
I'm trying to think of like a round, like a baby dinosaur.
Yeah, the one from Dinosaurs.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Not the mama?
Yeah, not the mama.
Yeah, I don't know what his name was.
It's like Baby Franklin or some horse shit. I'll
Yeah.
find out. Go ahead.
Yeah, just baby Franklin drunk in the White House
that's
bathtub.
Not his name.
But anyway, so it was like...
I thought his name was just Baby.
No, it wasn't Baby. Baby Sinclair.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
No, but Sinclair was the family's last name because Earl Sinclair.
Was it?
Yeah, so his name was just Baby.
Well, it's Baby Sinclair, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, come over to Patreon. We'll finish this.
Yeah, we'll
once
get to the bottom
once
of
we're done.
this
Yeah.
and more. Okay, continue, brother.
But yeah, it was just like one of the last like meetings between Churchill and Roosevelt and Stalin was at Yalta, where they kind of carved up the post-war order, and Roosevelt actually insisted that de Gaulle not be invited, so he just kind of snubbed him. And it was only after like every other fucking government recognized de Gaulle as the post-war leader of France that the Americans finally reluctantly came around. But it was interesting where on the...
Because I guess America didn't have a ton of colonies at this time, right?
No, I mean, we had like Puerto Rico and Hawaii, a couple others.
In North America.
Yes. But it was interesting. On his way back from Yalta on the conference, Roosevelt actually wanted to meet de Gaulle in Algiers, but de Gaulle refused because he was so, butthurt about being excluded from the Yalta conference. Because, like I said, Roosevelt had his problems with him, but also he just kind of thought it would overcomplicate it if it was negotiations between 4 powers instead of just between 3 powers. So de Gaulle actually refused to meet with him, and then Roosevelt went back and actually criticized de Gaulle to the U.S. Congress, and then Roosevelt died right after, so it didn't really matter. But besides Roosevelt, there was also Allen Dulles, the future CIA leader, was at this time the head of the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA. He was in Switzerland, and as the OSS chief in Switzerland, he kind of ran his own policy. And just according to David Talbot in Devil's Chessboard, Dulles favored a right-wing faction of the French resistance that was opposed to de Gaulle. In his war memoirs, de Gaulle accused Dulles of being part of a scheme that was determined to silence or set aside the French general. A right-wing resistance leader named Pierre de Benneville on Dulles' OSS payroll was later accused of betraying Jean Moulin, de Gaulle's dashing representative in the French underground, to the Gestapo. After he was captured, Moulin was subjected to brutal torture before being beaten to death, allegedly by the notorious war criminal Klaus Barbie. So the allegation is that Dulles favored a more right-wing faction and had one of de Gaulle's right-hand men set up and tortured and killed by the Gestapo to try to, as part of a power struggle to determine who would actually run the show after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Well, damn.
Yeah, why do they care so much? I just don't
Why
get
you
it.
torture a guy and then kill? Well, because you're trying to get stuff from him, I guess.
Yeah.
De Gaulle was also
they
a
sent a
prisoner of
message.
war in World War I, I believe.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he tried to escape a bunch of times.
Yeah. Oh, look out for that 6'5" guy. He's gonna blend into the populace.
The next time they tried to assassinate him, they poisoned all the 14-year-olds in France.
It's like hundreds of thousands of Frenchmen die.
Yeah.
But really, the reason he wanted him dead is Alan Dulles, right? Is that his name?
Yeah.
It's just the oil situation. He's obviously somehow the CIA or America is making money off of the oil in Algeria.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of chicken and egg question where I do believe it is primarily all about the resources and the money. So it's defense contractors want their war, multinationals want their oil and, lithium or whatever for cheap. But you can't really say that. If you can't think of yourself as a good person if that's what you believe. Mm-hmm. So they all kind of have this justifying ideology. And you see that now with the Ukraine war where everybody's like, oh, we're defending freedom and democracy. Ukraine's not a fucking democracy. It's an extremely corrupt dictatorship. But, or anti-communism was the other one, like J. Edgar Hoover. These people genuinely convinced themselves that communism would destroy Christianity, would destroy the way of life of everybody. It would, in doom humanity to centuries of misery, all this kind of stuff. So it's I think it is ultimately about the money and the resources, but everybody comes up with their own kind of ideological justification for the money and the resources, and then that ideological justification becomes more powerful to the point where they honestly believe what they say about this ideological justification, whether it's anti-communism or spreading freedom and democracy like George W. Bush. They just they come up with a line of bullshit and eventually they get high on their own supply, and they really do believe that when they say it.
Do you think de Gaulle was a little communist? You think he liked a little bit of it in his drink?
De Gaulle was a total anti-communist, but the CIA still tried to have him killed because he was a French nationalist. He believed France should set its own course. He tried to, after the war, he tried to work with Germany to try to offset the American influence, and that's sort of the power of the European Union now is France and Germany work together, and then by working together, they can make the European Union kind of do almost whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw some Michael Parenti lecture once, and he was like, all these countries that we extract resources from, it's they have the resources. It's not like they don't want to sell them to you.
Yeah.
They want to sell them to you, but it's not enough for these, what's for lack of a better term, capitalists. They want to essentially own the country and control every aspect of it.
Right. I mean, it's
Which is how you end up with a bayonet up your ass. Hillary Clinton ordered to be put
still
there.
Have bayonets.
Yeah.
What?
They still have bayonets?
Well, Gaddafi.
Oh, yeah, that was a bayonet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just thought it was a knife. I thought it was a sword. I pictured
maybe
like
it
the
was. I don't know.
sword, like that a sword swallower would have. I thought it was like a sword swallower.
The guy
was
pulled
just
it out of his mouth and into Gaddafi's ass.
yeah, I thought it was like a guy lit it on fire, put it down his throat, and then into Gaddafi's ass. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then and he said, "This will teach you to try to create a United States of Africa."
Right.
They put a sword directly up his ass. But, okay, so the war ends. Then de Gaulle's in charge of the interim government in France from 1944 to 46. He resigns in 46. He hands it over to civilian rule. And then this is after the war. We're in what's called the Fourth French Republic. And this is kind of a chaotic period. Like, there's a lot of change of government and all that. And this is where de Gaulle makes his kind of famous quote about France. He says, "How can you govern a country that has 246 varieties of cheese?" Mm-hmm. And he's commenting on this kind of post-World War II period and all the chaos. And a lot of the chaos is caused by Algeria. And this is what makes de Gaulle return to politics in 1958. So just like Cliff Notes history of France and Algeria. In 1830, France invades and conquers Algeria. Between 1830 and 1875, about a third of the population of Algeria is killed, whether by, germs, diseases, warfare, starvation.
And just from the French showing up.
Yeah, just the French show up and they kill like 1 in every 3 people there.
You said 1875?
1830 to 1875.
Jeez.
So, because it's like, the French conquer it in 1830, but there's just continued resistance for like 45 years. And eventually they just kill so many people that they get worn down. So by the 1870s, there's not really much resistance to French rule anymore. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is hundreds of thousands of French and other European people start going over to Algeria and settling it, living there and all that. And so by the time of de Gaulle, there were about 1 million French people living in Algeria. And they're called the Blackfeet for whatever reason. But they become important because they're like, hey, you got to keep this occupation going because there's 1 million French and like 9 million Muslims in Algeria. Mm-hmm. And, they're like any other reactionaries. They want the army there to keep it's like the Israelis and the Palestinians. They want to keep the Muslims under control. They want the army there. They don't want to leave.
Right.
They think that that's their home now. But in 1954, another guerrilla resistance and warfare starts again in Algeria after being dormant since the 1870s. So 1954, and this is what, in the movie The Battle of Algiers, this is the period that we're talking about here in the 1950s. And so in 1958, this is what kind of brings de Gaulle back to power, is that there's actually a military coup in Algeria because there's so many like French units over there fighting the guerrillas, and they are so much more, reactionary and militant about it than the civilian government back in Paris, that they actually say, hey, we're just going to take over Algiers, the capital of Algeria, and we're going to run this thing. And actually the French back in Paris start getting worried that these paratroopers are actually going to invade mainland France and take over the civilian government there because, so much of the French military is over there and they're dedicated to this policy. Mm-hmm. So this is why Charles de Gaulle is able to come back politically, because the civilian government fails and he's the only person as this World War II hero who has the credibility to kind of restore order to this whole thing.
Right. How big of a military presence did they have?
I don't know the exact numbers, but, like thousands of... Because, by this point they were out of Vietnam, so this was like their only active military commitment was in Algeria.
Right.
But so, the people were worried that Algerian paratroopers would take Paris. De Gaulle presents himself as this bulwark against the coup. So on June 1, 1958, he's appointed prime minister. He says Algeria is the top priority for the new government. June 1958, he visits Algeria. And he actually, he addresses these like really rapturous crowds, because at first he kind of comes back into power by promising to appeal to everybody. And so he goes to Algeria, and, all the French, they come out and they see him, these huge crowds, World War II hero, and he addresses them, and he apparently says or you can see video of him saying, "Long live French Algeria," which the crowd loves, and he later says he slipped out. He didn't really mean that, because "Long live French Algeria," of course, suggests that you're just going to keep it a colony forever. And Charles de Gaulle very much had no intention of doing that, and his reasons for that were simply enough. As I mentioned, he says Algeria has 9 million Muslims.
That's very literally the Kill Whitey moment in Black Sheep with Chris Farley, where he gets so hyped that he just says the exact thing he thinks they want to hear. Uh-huh. It was in like a reggae what was it? I forget what it was. It was like, "Kill Whitey." That's he's just, French Algeria. Okay, continue.
Oh, yeah. So I watched this documentary. It's pretty good. It's called Charles de Gaulle, the Last King of France. It's French language documentary, but it's by Patrick Rotman. And so it's like, colorized, and it covers a lot of these events. But so de Gaulle, the reason, as he says to his advisors, he says, quote, Algeria, or this is a paraphrase, Algeria has 9 million Muslims, 1 million Europeans. And so an idea that was put forward was Algeria would become integrated with France, like a U.S. state or whatever. And de Gaulle's against this because he says integration would result in 80 Arab MPs who would make French law. Like, he was kind of, let's say, an old school segregationist or whatever.
Wait, that's not nice of him.
Right. So it's like he did the right thing ending the war, but his reasons were this 9 million Muslims would take over France. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of goes about getting out of this war through a variety of different ways. And
because we saw what 2 Muslims did to Charlie Hebdo, right?
And I do just want to say, sometimes just talking about the JFK assassination, you say what I believe to be the truth, which is JFK was killed partly as a result of trying to pull out of the Vietnam War. And people are like, oh, you think JFK was some sort of hippie peacenik? And it's like, no, it's just how the system works. Like, again, de Gaulle is this racist imperialist who killed, thousands of people in Algeria. Uh-huh. And he's still... They tried to kill him 30 fucking times.
Right.
I mean, this is like, you should just kind of understand violence makes the world go around.
Yeah.
Just because just because worse people kill you, it doesn't mean you're like some hippie socialist. It's just you had a better policy, a more peace-oriented policy, and that can get you killed no matter what kind of person you are.
I mean, and you might not even know the answer to this, but did Kennedy have another, his sights on another place to possibly invade or start an issue with?
Not really. I mean, Kennedy, when he first came in, he actually inherited what was becoming a civil war in Laos, and he was able to neutralize Laos. He negotiated with the Soviets, and they managed to avoid a war, even though they were telling him, hey, you should deploy 100,000 U.S. troops into Laos so we can settle this. So he manages to avoid the war in Laos, but he has to escalate in Vietnam in exchange. It's sort of, Peter Dale Scott talks about every time a U.S. conflict winds down since World War II, there's an escalation in another area. And again, we see that with Afghanistan becomes Ukraine. But so he starts deploying these advisors to Vietnam, but then he wants to take them all out by 1965. And there are other areas such as Indonesia. He wanted to negotiate it there. He wanted to recognize the democratic government of the Congo. And those are like 2 of the most resource-rich areas in the world that would both have military coups backed by the CIA after Kennedy was assassinated and would become, in the case of Indonesia, like almost a U.S. colony. And then in the case of the Congo, like a really... well, for a while, a U.S. colony, and now like a really chaotic, borderline failed state where all that cobalt comes from because there's no government to drive a hard bargain. You can just play all these warring tribes off against each other.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking earlier about like they want to sell the resources, but it's like if you could military coup your landlord, and instead of paying, market rent, you would pay like $100 a month or something. Mm-hmm. You just gotta have his family shot as they're going through a limo, and set up 3 sniper teams at different points.
Right.
And that's why there hasn't been an invasion on these countries, because it's already kind of just happened and they're being used and it's long and done and they're just still being pumped, like places like the Congo and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they use the term post-colonialism or neo-colonialism, and I think that's accurate, where it's like originally in the scramble for Africa, the Europeans would go in and they would just kind of set up the government and they would run everything themselves, and they tried to keep that going after World War II, but it just didn't work. So now what they do is they just put in somebody they can buy off. Like in the Congo, there's a guy, Mobutu, was the dictator of the Congo who overthrew the democratic government in a CIA-backed coup. He was a billionaire several times over by the time he died, and that was just because the Western corporations would just pay him a little bit of money and his family some money, and then he would give them all the resources for super cheap.
Yeah.
So you just like immiserate everyone in the country and buy off the ruling part of family. It's much cheaper than paying market price for these resources, which would raise the living standards of everyone in the country.
Sure. Or being forced to go into a country and suppress people. Mm-hmm. Just talk to a leader that already suppresses the people and make a deal with them.
Yeah. But so de Gaulle comes in, he gets this new constitution, is a referendum campaign. De Gaulle's 68 years old at this time in 1958. Because of the new constitution, de Gaulle's elected president, not prime minister. He gets the direct elections of president. This is the transition from before de Gaulle was the Fourth Republic of France. This becomes the Fifth Republic of France. And this is what they're still on today, this kind of system that de Gaulle set up because he was so popular and he was able to bypass the political class and go directly to the French people through television and all that. But in 1959, he launches a new offensive in Algeria. It's kind of the same Vietnam logic where he wants to negotiate from a position of strength. Like, so he has a bunch of people killed in this colonial war, but he goes on TV and he essentially says there's going to be a referendum in Algeria. And he says there's going to be three options where you can either vote for integration, like Algeria becomes like a state of France. You can vote for independence, or you can vote for self-administration as a territory of France. And he says that the last one is the option he would prefer in his TV address. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's 1 million Europeans, 9 million Muslims. It's obvious that independence is going to win the referendum. So basically, as soon as he goes on TV...
Oh, because the Muslims got to vote on it.
Yeah, he says the people of Algeria will be able to vote on this referendum.
Oh, wow.
But part of that had something to do with like all the pressure they were putting on the French occupiers, right?
Right. I mean, this is because since 1954, they've been fighting a guerrilla war,
right.
And people in mainland France they're really sick of it, of like French troops getting killed over there. They don't really care.
And civilians too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the French living in Algeria, this is to them, it's life or death. They're like, we need the army here. We need to suppress the majority.
Right.
So as soon as de Gaulle goes on TV and announces this referendum, all the French living in Algeria, or most of them, view this as a betrayal. Uh-huh. And this is where the OAS is the Organisation Armée Secrète, secret armed organization. Mm-hmm. This is set up almost right after he announces this referendum. And then there is another referendum within France itself, January 1961, where 75% of French voters back his Algeria policy in this referendum. But in January 1961, the same month of that referendum, the OAS is set up in Franco's Spain. Mm-hmm. Spain was still a dictatorship after World War II, and the OAS is set up there mostly among existing networks of quote unquote counter-terrorists, and these were just people, sometimes soldiers, sometimes ex-soldiers who had been carrying out attacks against the Algerian National Liberation Front, the FLN. They'd been sort of involved in this war in Algeria since the 1954, and they set up this organization as a response to this referendum of self-determination for Algeria, and basically started launching like assassinations, terrorism, and then a whole bunch of different plots to kill Charles de Gaulle.
And let me just say, if you are going to watch the movie The Battle of Algiers with your wife or your girlfriend, you are going to have like a 5-minute conversation, like explaining to her the type of movie that it is. And you are going to have to watch like one of her movies the next week, like The First Wives Club or The Family Stone or one of her lady movies, because it is a very like, there's something about the movie where it's very good at portraying kind of like the struggle for independence and kind of what everybody was going through, and portraying, I guess, like both sides of the conflict, because it seems like the Algerian War for Independence was a very like messy and hard fought and like non-linear struggle. Right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I think it is, looking at the history, it's so much more fascinating, this sort of black and white thing where you can see like a guy like de Gaulle.
Because I tried to watch it with Deb like years ago, and she was like, I don't like this. So I watched it by myself. I think. Yeah.
But yeah, like a guy like de Gaulle, you wouldn't call him a good person, but he was still right in this instance. Mm-hmm. And it is interesting where, you know, the OAS gets set up January 61, and they start launching assassinations against him and other people. Well, I'll cover it a bit more on the Patreon. De Gaulle starts to set up his own networks, like his own paramilitary forces, and he starts just having his enemies killed, you know, outside the confines of the state, and then the French state, you know, denies we had any involvement in it. Right. And it is sort of interesting as a historical experiment. It's like, how could JFK have survived? Well, he could have done what de Gaulle did. Like, if JFK wanted to live, he needed to understand better the forces against him.
Right. Castro too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Castro, like, if you watch the Oliver Stone Putin interviews, one of my favorite quotes from it is Putin tells Oliver Stone that when he met Fidel Castro, Castro told him, the reason I lived so long is I always personally picked my own security. Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, like Kennedy clearly got set up by the Secret Service in Dallas.
Right.
But it is something where it's like de Gaulle strikes back against the OAS with his own little death squads.
When Kennedy was interviewing security, he was like, do you have any hot cousins? Do you have a sister?
Well, and also, I mean, he had family. Well, I guess they were heading into politics, right? Who in his family was in politics before he got in?
Kennedy?
Yeah.
He's like... his I want to say grandfather was the mayor of Boston, Honey Fitz.
That's not enough, though. You know, you need people in your family to be in the ranks of politics, to be like, boys, we got to suit up. Like, I'm about to make some moves.
Well, his dad made a bunch of money from Prohibition, so I guess.
Yeah.
What, did he just have like a vision for his?
His dad should have been like, you know, got on the horn. He should have called his dad and been like, I need the mafia to help me. But then you accuse a man of throwing a coup, I guess, right?
Right.
Technically, yeah, his dad was head of Roosevelt's SEC, and he was going to run for president, but Roosevelt and J. Edgar Hoover like blackmailed him somehow. We don't know exactly how, but I mean, I guess it's because he was a bootlegger and he liked him young.
The wine.
Yeah. It is just sort of like, how would Kennedy survive that? He would have to have James Angleton at the CIA, like, just get a guy, you know, like when you're trying to do a hit in The Sopranos, just make it look like a robbery, and just kind of, you know, you get Angleton, you get Richard Helms, you just have like a bunch of your enemies in DC just shot in like armed robberies,
right,
where nobody gets arrested, and you're like, oh fuck, I guess the crime's getting bad in DC. This is terrible.
I guess the crime's getting bad. Yeah,
you know,
yeah, because Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, but he didn't like purge the organization, so there were all these like Dulles loyalists that were still left over at the
right, and that's a big part of David Talbot's book is like Allen Dulles still had his house, and these like highest level people in the CIA, James Angleton, Richard Helms, they would come over to his house 2 or 3 times a week still. And he would essentially be running a government in exile. And so it was just something where it's like de Gaulle, as we'll go through on the Patreon, he got really serious about this. And, you know, he set up death squads. He understood the stakes. He survived an assassination attempt about just over a year before Kennedy did, which is depicted in the movie The Day of the Jackal. We'll talk about the circumstances of that on the Patreon. But it is just something where it's like, if you want to look at history and you want to do the hypothetical of how could John F. Kennedy have not been assassinated, he had to do what Charles de Gaulle did.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Join us on Patreon.
Up, boys.
Yeah.
Patreon.com/outforsmokes. We'll see you over there.
Yeah. Wait. I'll just tease it. So when we get to the Patreon, I'll talk about the actual circumstances of this coup attempt against de Gaulle, how he overcame it, what the CIA links are, what the evidence is of that, and we'll talk a bit about his death squads and how he survived, how de Gaulle got to die of old age, whereas Kennedy got a bullet in his brain.
Hey, also, ladies, his wife was there for a lot of those attempts. So why don't you carry on over to Patreon and we'll explain how her big titties blocked some bullets.
What?
Over on the Patreon.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for that. See you on Patreon.